What is wrong with the big-time wide receivers? We're going to talk about that. Plus, there's some serious edge prospects. Who are they? And a little more or less right now on Locked On NFL Draft. Let's go.
You are Locked On NFL Draft, your daily podcast covering the NFL Draft. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
That is right. You heard the wonderful woman say it's Locked On NFL Draft, and that means former NFL AFL defensive back Eric Crocker. You can follow him on Twitter at Eric_Crocker. My man Ryan Tracy from Rogue Analytics at Ryan Tracy NFL on Twitter, and I am John Harris. You can follow me at J Harris Football, and I hang with the Houston Texans to talk a lot on the radio and talk with my two new best friends. And I got to say, I feel like Zach Galifianakis are three best friends anyone could have. I love being on the show with you guys and appreciate you all for making us your first listen of the day right here on Locked On NFL Draft. The boys, before we go anywhere, tonight's show is brought to you by Prize Picks. Tonight's episode of Locked On NFL Draft is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players. If they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money in your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $200 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. All right, gentlemen, one of the things, and actually Eric and I were talking before the show, and Ryan jumped in, and we were all kind of on the same page with this. When I sat down to do my Harris 100 this year, we did some prospect rankings the other day, and we were talking about different positions. And we did quarterbacks and running backs, and I thought, let's keep going. Wide receivers, edges, and then I started writing down my wide receivers, and I went, whoa. Jackson Smith-Njigba hurt. Kayshon Boutte, nothing really. Dontavian Wicks at Virginia, in the witness protection program, because that offense has changed completely. I won't put that all on Dontavian. I'll put that all on the new Virginia coaching staff that has just completely neutered a lot of really talented guys. It's really been kind of a tough watch for the bigger names. Josh Downs, North Carolina, banged up for 2-3 games. Guys, I don't know what to make of this wide receiver core at that point. But, Eric, we'll start with you. Smith-Njigba hurt. Boutte not doing much. Wicks, Cedric Tillman for Tennessee hurt. What do we make of this wide receiver core right now as we sit through going into week 5?
I think, and I think that was key there where you said going into week 5, because by the end of the season, especially come draft time, maybe we find a bunch of receivers that we end up liking, and maybe a bunch of receivers that the NFL likes, and you have 6 guys going to top 20 again like they had last year. But it has been very underwhelming so far with what you were expecting from a lot of these guys. You talked about Kayshon Boutte, and maybe it has to do with Jaden Daniels, and he's up and down. But I think that Kayshon Boutte has had plenty of opportunities to make a play. Be a guy. Help your quarterback out, right? You don't have the best quarterback. It's not like you're catching passes from Joe Burrow. So you got to make the best of it. I'm not quite sure he's done that. All right. You got other guys, Jackson Smith-Njigba. You talked about him being banged up. Now he's looking like, man, it's Marvin Harrison Jr., the better prospect. When he's able to come out, we know he's not draft eligible, but they got a couple other receivers there. So who's the guy? And I think in the last few years, you've been able to look and see, okay, you got Devontae Smith, Jamar Chase, before that, there were a few really, top guys where you're like, okay, these are the top guys with CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Justin Jefferson. It was very clear. In this class, I have no idea who the guys are. I know who they're supposed to be, but it hasn't played out that way.
I know who one guy is. I don't know if he's the guy, but I got
Jordan
one
Addison?
guy. Yeah, I was going to steal him from you, you sneaky little dude. But I mean, here's the problem though, is like, we kind of forget, right? He's an award winner. He should have been at the top of the list to begin with, and we all kind of look past him. And I think it's the transfer and going to a new school and Riley and Caleb and how it's all going to come along. Okay, fine. But clearly, he's jumped back on. He's averaging 16 yards of reception, second in the country in touchdowns for this draft class. Like, there's a lot of statistical evidence to say that he's still the guy. But there's a couple of drawbacks, and it goes hand in hand with JSN, and maybe some of the other guys too. He's slight. He's underbuilt. You can't avoid the comparison to Devonta Smith, right? How do you stack up to that? I think that's the thing that's holding him back in terms of the eyes of the nation. But I don't know if that's what happens with teams, John.
Yeah, and that's the important thing here to realize. As we go through this and we rank players and we move guys around and all that kind of stuff, we're doing it for all 32 teams in the league. There are 32 teams in the league, so they're going to all look at this differently, and they're going to look at certain receivers versus other receivers. They might be looking for, like, take the Eagles, for instance, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. They have those two guys. They may not look at perimeter receivers the same way. They may not stack rank them a certain way. They may look at more, hey, we want more of this type of receiver. We can be a little bit pickier with that. I just got through watching Chicago Bears. They should look at every receiver that's ever caught a pass in college football because they don't have anybody of that ilk. I'll give you a guy that's in my neck of the woods that I think is standing out, and I had him in the Harris 100, and I think he has been absolutely fantastic. He's not as slight. He's 205 pounds. He's 6'2", and he can flat out fly, and that's Rashee Rice from out of SMU. He can get it. Those other guys you mentioned, now Jackson Smith-Njigba is not, but he's been hurt. So, I mean, how does he develop without those two other star receivers behind him or next to him? But when he comes back, Marvin Harrison Jr. And Emeka Ibuka, those guys are going to be just as good as the two other guys that were gone. But Rashee Rice from out of SMU is a guy that has stood out that I had relatively highly ranked. I think I had him in the top 60, top 65. He's one guy in the top 60, 65, along with Jordan Addison, that has produced. I like those two guys. And the other guy, I think, from the receiver standpoint.
Hold on 1 second, John. I do kind of want to circle back on Rashee Rice and not skip over him just yet. But, you talked about how well he's playing. And this is one of the guys who's been one of the better senior receivers from this class. And when you talk about what he's kind of done this year and really step up to the plate because, what happened last year? They had Danny Gray. They had Reggie Roberson. Well, you lose both of those guys. Somebody has to step up, and it's been him, and he has done that, and he's doing extremely well. So having a great year for him, I kind of wanted to give him his flowers before we move on to the next guy.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think the other guy that I would, as you say, give flowers to is Charlie Jones out of Purdue. I mean, this is a guy. Now, he was completely off the map. He transferred, I think, 3 times. But he got to Purdue and Aiden O'Connell, and I just remember seeing him for the first time against Syracuse. I heard his name a couple times, and I didn't get a chance to see the Penn State game yet. And I had heard his name, and I'm like, okay, I'm curious. And the first play he just runs go route and ran right past Garrett Williams, the corner, who I think is really good for Syracuse. And I'm like, yo, that speed, he's going to find a place in the NFL. So I think Charlie Jones is going to be a guy that gets into my Harris 100 at some point. But to me, right now, the best producing, best athlete, best combination of everything you're looking for, as Eric said, is Rashee Rice from out of SMU. Now, how does that relate to the edge position, and who do we have? Is it as much a drop-off at the edge position as it is? Ryan Tracy did a deep dive. We're going to talk about our edge defenders next. But before we get to that, we got to talk a little bit about Bet Online. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, all the news you need, podcasts, and in-depth articles, analysis on any game you're looking for. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check on all your favorite games and events. That includes Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, and, of course, the sports we love, football. Head to BetOnline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Now, we jump from quarterbacks, running backs early in the week, wide receivers. We got to give defenders some love. Now, we'll get to the O-line at some point. Some offensive linemen I love, but we got to give some love to the defense. And, Ryan, I know you did a pretty deep dive into the edge players that are potentially in this draft. I, as all of us I think do, have Will Anderson number one in the overall in the Harris 100. That was kind of easy. I just slipped them in there, watched a little bit of film, had seen so much from him. Will Anderson number one. Is that the case, Ryan Tracy? Is Will Anderson Jr. the clear number one at the edge? and who then follows him up?
If you're just talking about production, no, not yet. I will say this, though. He started slow and he is coming on fast. The one thing that Will dominates right now in the NCAAs is finish rate. When he is clear of his block and is able to produce a pressure, he finishes at nearly 55% completion rate of getting that sack when he can get a pressure. And that is heads and tails above anybody else in the country. I think that's what we're used to. So it is about going back to how does he get there? He's a little bit low comparatively to the top 10 right now in terms of how many times he actually does win his initial block. And then producing that pressure is the follow-on. So right now, overall, he's sitting at number 4. Couple of names that are ahead of him include B.J. Ojulri, a guy that has played at LSU and has a little bit more of an even way that he plays in terms of winning the rep, getting the pressure, and completing the sack. And then I think the sleeper of the group is right now the guy that's barely up at number 1, and that's Braylon Trice from Washington, and a guy that is super even, wins nearly 39% of his reps in the pass rush. And that gives you the opportunity to finish and make your impact. And that's where he's winning right now.
Guys getting pressure off the edge. A guy that I like for Clemson, and Ryan, I'd like to see where you have him right now, and that's Miles Murphy from out of Clemson. I think he's a guy kind of like Jonathan Allen, a guy that can go inside, a guy that can go outside. I think those guys have become even more valuable in the NFL. Guys like that can play outside. Rasheem Green, Croc, you saw him at USC. He's a young dude when he's at USC, but he can rush the edge, but then he bumps inside on pass rush downs. Those guys can be pretty valuable. I think Miles Murphy can do that. What do you see from him, Ryan?
I like what he brings. It's just a little bit, like you said, not the edge consistency. He is that tweener. So he's not in the top 20 currently because of that. It's about the first step. It's about bringing power when he comes down inside. But that versatility, this is where statistics and analysis differ from what you see on film because of how many different ways you can use him. I'm with you. I actually like him quite a bit. And I actually think that he's starting to pick up speed as they go through the season. I think they have some matchups coming. They're going to help him out and he'll be able to raise that stock statistically in production pretty easily.
Yeah,
I wanted to ask him about Isaiah Foskey because, I mean, this is a guy 6'5", around 260 pounds, looks to be maybe more of a 3-4 outside guy, more of a stand-up edge rusher type of prospect. But what are you seeing from him from an analytical standpoint?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I like him standing up a whole lot better. And he's in the mid-40s in terms of the overall metric, mostly brought down by the pressure weight. He actually wins more reps at the initial block than he's generating pressure. Now, some of that, I believe, you can see some ball games where they're rolling away from him, making things a little bit harder. But he's not having a whole lot of support in terms of other guys on that front producing pressure. The tension, I think, is slowing him down a little bit. Not a guy that I think can't improve. Getting into the top 10 might be a tall task, but I agree with you. I think he's a prospect that you have to keep an eye on, and I had a pretty good grade on him coming in.
I think one guy that's going to get a lot of run, and it might have zero to do with his production, but he is a freakazoid athlete, and that's Will McDonald from out of Iowa State. Incredible athlete, a guy that was just scratching the surface, knew nothing about football before a football coach. And how many times have we heard this story? This guy knew nothing about football. He's a basketball player. And also the football coach went and said, hey, you want to play football? He's like, yeah, sure, why not? When he went on his recruiting trip, he didn't even know, I think it was to Wisconsin. He didn't even know who Barry Alvarez was. He had no knowledge of Wisconsin. He had no knowledge of anything about football. But he's an incredible athlete. And there are teams, and I know one of them in my division, that the athleticism that a guy portrays, his body, you know, whether he passes the bod pod test, those things matter. Absolutely matter, especially the Indianapolis Colts. Will McDonald from out of Iowa State. Ryan, thoughts about his burst of explosiveness off the edge?
That step is really what's going to buy him time, right? I agree. Like athletically, when we break down the athletic matrix after all the testing is said and done, I expect him to be in the top 5 from the film that I've seen. Now, I haven't done a deep dive or watched a lot of tape on him yet, but production-wise, he's lagging behind what his athleticism is. And that's the kind of upside guy that the Colts like to take, that the Chiefs like to take. There are a number of teams. They're going to base on what can you be. I'm going to coach you up to get you there, but show me something to begin with. I think that's part of his story.
There are a lot of edge players to watch. I like Isaiah Foskey. I like Foskey a lot. I think he can do some things. And I wouldn't be surprised if some team tries to do the Micah Parsons thing and try and play him stand up as a stack and then bring him down on rush downs. I wouldn't be surprised to see a team try that. When we get back, we are going to put our prospect spotlight on a few players and mix in some more or less. That's next. But as we go to break, I want to show you, see if you all can see this. Now, if you're just listening, you can't see my wedding ring. Now, I got this wedding ring on December 15th, 1995. And I lost it. Coaching. I thought I tied it to the string in my pants. I thought I had it, and it was gone. I went months without my wedding ring. Now, it wasn't an expensive purchase. My wife's was a little bit more, but you understand why. About 4 months later, one of my players said, "Hey, Coach, didn't you lose your wedding ring one day?" And I'm like, "Yeah," and he brought it to me. Well, I don't want you to have to rely on that sort of jewelry insurance. You need to rely on Brightco jewelry and watch insurance. That's the best and easiest way. And I know about Brightco back in 2000. I would have got it. It's the fastest, easiest, and cheapest way to cover your backside with the best jewelry insurance in the business. These guys know what they're doing. You can get covered in 2 minutes on your cell phone for whatever it is. You got emerald earrings. You've got, I don't know, diamond studs. You got a big chain that you love. I don't care, whatever it is. I mean, you got a wedding ring you don't want to lose. Brightco, that's where you need to go. Brightco.com, the watch and jewelry insurer that you've got to have on your side. Don't get stuck having lost a piece of jewelry without Brightco being on your side. All right, boys, last segment of the show. And when we go into the weekend or near the weekend, we always talk about prospects to watch. And we like to do a little price picks more or less. So I thought, you know what? Let's put the two together, and I'll give you the prospect to watch, and then I'm going to give you a more or less. It starts on Friday night. This is a guy that we talked about a little bit earlier in the week who's been slinging it. The lefty from out of University of Washington, Michael Penix, is now going on the road for the first time. Washington has not played a road game. They're 4-0. They're taking on UCLA, also 4-0, but they had a struggle with South Alabama. So Penix is a prospect to watch in that game. Ryan, you mentioned Tracy coming off the edge, also to watch for Washington. Zach Charbonnet for UCLA. So here's your more or less. Eric Crocker, starting with you. Michael Penix against UCLA. 315 yards, more or less, against the UCLA Bruins on Friday night.
So they bumped it up a little bit. You know, this is a guy last week. We got asked this question about Penix, and it was 300 yards. I said, absolutely. Well, he threw for 309 yards.
Yeah.
In the previous games before that, 345, 337, 397. All right, so I'm going to go with the trend here. I'm going to go with more in this case. He will hit for more than 315 yards.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about the weird question. He's a lefty. Is it harder to assess a lefty because we just see so few of them, Eric?
You know what you need to do? Do what they did with Tua's film, where they flipped the camera, and now he's throwing right-handed, and it looks normal now. So maybe we got to do that with Penix. Flip the view, and make it look like he's throwing right-handed because everything's backwards, and all of a sudden you like his throwing motion a little bit more.
That's funny. I'm going to go to my film department, my guy in the film department, Tommy. Tommy, give me a flip film. This is Virginia. I got to watch Brendan Armstrong. He's a lefty. Ryan, more or less, Penix, 315.
I think it's coming down. This is an interesting matchup because you would think if they were going to be slowed down, it was going to be Michigan State, right? They proved that wrong. The interesting thing for me with Penix is that he's hitting different receivers. It's not just Pogue. There's all kinds of guys contributing. I think that tells you he's going to throw for more than what this line is saying right now.
Okay. And since I'm the house, you both go more. All right, cool. Let's go to Big Ten last week. Michigan had a big win over Maryland at home. J.J. McCarthy struggled, but I don't really care about him. I care about Blake Corum. I think he's one of the more fun players in the country to watch, but he's taking on an Iowa defense led by Jack Campbell. Now, they're a little bit banged up at linebacker, so Campbell might move around, but Campbell's a heck of a player. At 6'5", 243, he looks kind of like Tremaine Edmonds. That's why I comped him 2 in the Harris 100. Corum went for 243 last week. Ryan Tracy, Ryan Corum's more or less number, as set by the house me, is 134 yards rushing at Iowa. 134 for Blake Corum. You going more or less?
I don't think it's going to be a 7-3 game. I'm going to tell you that. So given that he's coming off maybe the highlight of what can be an early career, I'm going to take the more. I think 135 plus is attainable for him, and I think he gets it done.
Eric Crocker, we'd like some Blake Corum. Are you willing to go more than 134 or less?
I'm going less. And I'm looking at the trends here. He had an explosive game, ran for 243 yards against Maryland. But when you look at the previous 3 games, he's just not getting the same amount of carries, right? 30 carries against Maryland. Prior to that, 12 carries against UConn, 9 carries against Hawaii, 13 carries against Colorado State. Now, maybe it's because of the competition that they were playing against and they just did not need him to do more. And he ran well, 71 rushing yards against Kentucky. He's averaging a ton of yards per carry, over 7 yards per carry on the season. I don't know if he's going to get 30 touches or anything close to that. So I'm going to have to go with the lower on his number.
You're going less than 134. All right. I agree with Eric. I think he's going to go less than 134, and I think it's got a lot to do with Iowa's defense. I think Iowa, Jack Campbell healthy, is going to be tough. Now, this one's tricky because the guy's playing for the first time all year. So there's a lot of factors that are involved for a running back playing his first game. But to me, it's a running game. Kentucky's taking on Ole Miss. And you can throw a dart and hit a really good running back in this one. Now, Zach Evans, who I love from out of North Shore here, is a suburb of Houston at Galena Park. He left last week with a medical issue. Now, anything with Zach Evans is always kind of murky, but it was a medical issue. He left the game, so it's not about him. It's about Kentucky's Chris Rodriguez Jr. First game, Ole Miss defense has improved. I'm setting the more or less prize pick number at 65 yards. Eric Crocker, it's his first game. More or less for Chris Rodriguez Jr., the hammer from Kentucky?
I'm going to go with more. I mean, this is a guy that, I identified in the offseason as a one-cut runner. I think he fits in this offense very well. You look at the offensive coordinator over there for Kentucky, Rich Gangrillo. He was a quarterback coach for the San Francisco 49ers last year, and he's kind of familiar with that play style, with that offense that they've already been utilizing over there in Kentucky. So him being that one-cut guy, getting upfield, I think he's going to do well. And he's kind of been the missing piece for the offense. So he can kind of help stabilize Will Levis, who's kind of been up and down. We see the traits, we see the ability. Some people really like him. I really liked him heading into the season. But I think he's going to help bring a little bit more consistency to the run game. I think they're going to really get after it with him. So I'm going to go with more for Chris Rodriguez.
Ryan Tracy, do you agree with our cohort going more or less than 65 yards for Chris Rodriguez against Ole Miss?
I think he certainly got it in him, but I'm going to tell you this. If you learn anything from running the ball in San Francisco is you don't break your running backs. I think they might want to take it easy with him a little bit. I don't know he gets that many chances. I'll take the less.
Now, we need to put that on a T-shirt. Don't break your running backs. That's pretty good. All right, last one. The game of the weekend. The college weekend always has some great games, no matter what. And they're always ones of surprises. This, I think, is being hyped as a great game, and I think it's going to be one. NC State's taking on Clemson. Now, we know Clemson's defensive line. We know Brian Brisset. We talked about Miles Murphy earlier. Those are two guys for me that are in the top 6, top 7 of my overall Harris 100. So this one is an aggregate. Clemson defensive line. Now, just the D-line. But they've got some dudes. Clemson defensive line, more or less 3 sacks of Devin Leary, NC State Wolfpack quarterback. Ryan Tracy, what do you say? More or less 3 sacks, Clemson's D-line against NC State.
3, not 3.5, okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to have to say, despite what I think is decent mobility, I think they get there. I like the look of them, and this might be a chance for them to really step out from everything that's been going on with the program, out from underneath all the emotion, and just get down to business. I will take the more here over 3.
Okay. Eric, more or less, Clemson's D-line, Miles Murphy, Tyler Davis, Brian Brisset, Rook Ororo. I mean, they've got dudes for days and young dudes too. Will that D-line get more or less than 3 sacks of Devin Leary?
I'm going to go with no. I watched them last week, and I think they played extremely inspired. Excuse me. We know that they have a teammate there, Bassett, who's been kind of going through some emotional things. I think they were kind of riding that high as well. Everyone playing high, everybody playing very inspired. But that was a tough game and emotional for a bunch of reasons. I mean, just the way the game played out. And I think those things can kind of kill a guy heading into that next week where it's like, man, we gave everything against Wake Forest. And now I think they come out here maybe a little bit more flat. I think I'm going to go with less for the sack number.
Clemson D-line, less than 3 sacks against Devin Leary. NC State Clemson, that is going to be a fun football game this weekend. Tons of prospects to watch now, and tons of prospects to watch, and hopefully you will join the three of us in watching them, and we'll discuss them right here on Locked On NFL Draft. We really appreciate you making Locked On NFL Draft your first listen every day. Now make your second listen. The Peacock and Williamson NFL show. Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson give you the expert NFL analysis in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. For Eric Crocker, Ryan Tracy, I'm John Harris. We appreciate you being here. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Let's go.